morning's general plenary session. Our first speaker is Dr. Grandon Gill. He is a professor at the University of South Florida and has extensive experience in case method research as well as writing cases for classroom use and facilitating case discussions. His MBA and DBA are both from Harvard Business School, where the case method originated. He is the author of the book Informing with the Case Method, and recently became a founding editor of Journal of Information Technology Education Discussion Cases, a publication outlet for case studies in the MIS, IT, and informing science fields. He is interested participants will be encouraged to remain in touch with the facilitator for possible participation in future grant initiatives and workshops. Please welcome Dr. Grandon Gill.
Thank you very much. Apparently that was the biography that I wrote for the case workshop that we did a couple of days ago, but today I am not going to be strictly talking about the case method. Rather, I am going to talk about some initiatives that we had to try to integrate research, practice, and education at the University of South Florida, which is located in Tampa, which for those of you who are familiar with Florida is not in the south of Florida. But we were pretty far south when we were created, and so that's how we got the name. And my dean, Moise Lamayam, was supposed to actually be doing a parallel presentation with me where he was going to talk over the initiatives and I was going to talk about the analysis of how they do this type of integration. But he got called away by the trustees at the last minute, so I am going to take on his part. So, the challenge that we face is the question of what can we do about our business schools? And we have a lot of points of pride in business schools across the U.S. Our students are among the most likely to cross ethical boundaries. On every survey that's done, we come out last on ethics. Employers are questioning the skills that we're emphasizing as we teach folks, and practice completely ignores our research. We're also very expensive, and the rest of the university doesn't particularly like us because a business faculty member might end up making twice what a philosophy faculty member makes, and that's never something that generates good feelings. And so if we give our institutions a justification for cutting back on business education, you can be sure that they will be happy to take it. Now, if you think this is an exaggeration, what I'd like to do is introduce the presentation by some quotes that relate to the problem. What I will then do is talk about some specific initiatives that we've done at the University of South Florida, which I believe are really moving us in the right direction. I'll do a segue into the world of informing in a complex world, because informing in a complex world is, of course, one of the subjects of my research, though you wouldn't have known it from the biography I wrote. But it is also the basis for my belief in the importance of integrating research, education, and practice, as well as the disciplines. I will then return to the initiatives and do an analysis of them from an informing context, and then finally I will make a very quick conclusion. So let's talk a little bit about the problem, and I'm mainly doing this with a series of quotes and references. Ethics of business students. Just to read it, a well-known study on the subject of academic dishonesty surveyed over 5,000 business and non-business graduate students. That study found that 56% of graduate business students admitted to having cheated one or more times in the past year, compared with 47% of non-business graduate students. Yay, we won. Our impact on student ethics. A study found that while entering business, students score significantly lower on ethics questionnaire than other undergraduate students when entering school. No improvement in scores was found by the end of their 4th year. In fact, their scores dropped slightly, but the difference was not large enough to be statistically significant. Thank God for statistical significance is all I can say there. So the best we can say is we didn't actually make it much worse. Is business education critical? If you look at the top 13 spots in the Forbes 500 occupied by founders and family members, Walmart, Microsoft, Berkshire Hathaway, Oracle, and so forth, only 2 of these had business education. How can you rise to the top of a field without having any education in it? In fact, 4 didn't even have an undergraduate degree. Do we need business education in the financial services sector? Long the biggest employer of graduating MBAs, having an MBA does not increase the odds of promotion. McKinsey, a well-known consulting firm, now hires 50-50 split, with half the new employees coming from MBA program and the other half consisting of PhDs, MDs, law school graduates, or graduates with other degrees. Their non-MBA employees go through a 6-week training period and are deemed ready to perform without needing an MBA. So what that's saying is if we teach someone in 6 weeks, they can learn everything that they would learn in a 2-year MBA. Great. Is business education effective? This is a quote from a well-known article. Recently, an investment banker was horrified to find that an MBA graduate had hired from a leading business school. An individual who apparently had taken a number of courses in finance could not calculate the net present value of a future stream of cash payments. That, by the way, is the type of thing that we typically teach our students in the 7th grade when we teach them about compound interest. Cool. Top recruiter at Harvard said, if given the choice between the admit list and the graduation list, the admit list is what you want. That way, we haven't had a chance to do damage to them. Is business education worth it? I won't read this one, but basically the gist of this one is that they do a computation of how much an MBA is worth in terms of lifetime salary, and what we're discovering is that value of the degree is getting smaller and smaller. When you take the cost of what it costs to do the degree and opportunity cost, and then you figure out the extra income over time. So we're basically reducing the value of an MBA the way we compute it. Now let's go on to our research. Pfeffer comments that in a recent book that reviewed the major contributions to the practice of management, not one of the 50 innovations they listed appeared to be the result of academic research. He also points out that a relatively small percentage of business books are actually written by business academics. And it turns out that the ones that are written by business academics are frequently so heavily ghost-written that it isn't even the academics who really wrote them. Where is the information flowing? Well, a landmark study done in 1988 attempted to monitor the flow of concepts between academia and practice, and what they found is there wasn't much flow, and the only flow they could find was from practice to academia. Does our research replicate? Because we're very proud of the rigor of our research. Well, most of our journals will not publish replication research, and there's a good reason for that. Our research virtually never replicates, so it's very embarrassing when we publish it. There's a group of researchers who have been doing systematic studies of replication research. In finance, of the 54 extensions they were able to find, 60% conflicted with early results. Now, this is based on simple hypothesis tests. When 60% conflict, that means you're doing less well than flipping coins. Only 20% provided full confirmation. Marketing, we found that the same 60%. In accounting, 50% conflicted. Hey, at least they did the coin flip. In economics, 61% conflicted. So if you wonder why people are suspicious of economists, you have a pretty good idea. In management, only 14% conflicted. So you'd say, oh, management's doing great. But the way they scored this, if they got any hypothesis right, you typically would say, okay, that's in the plus column. Well, the problem with management is you'll never find a paper with less than about 8 hypotheses. So it becomes very, very hard, almost impossible to get all of them wrong. Do we recognize the problem? This is from Friday's Wall Street Journal. I love this quote. 11% of business leaders strongly agree that today's graduates have the skills and competencies in business that they need. Meanwhile, 96% of college and university chief academic officers were extremely or somewhat confident in their institution's ability to prepare students for the workforce. Yay, administrators. My dean may have seen these slides. That may be why he got this conflict. So what are we trying to do about this situation at the University of South Florida's College of Business? And I'm going to focus on 5 initiatives that I think are very interesting ones. And I'll talk about them briefly, and then I'll go back to sort of analyze them. The first is our attempt to create designated areas of strategic focus within the college. If you look at USF's College of Business, it has some pretty good things going for it. Its part-time MBA was number 36 in the U.S., number 1 among Florida public universities. And you know, we can always slice and dice the data away to get number 1. But the fact is, that's not bad. Our accounting information system's number 1 in the U.S. Our MIS program is typically rated in the top 25 in the U.S. We have a top-rated entrepreneurship program, et cetera, et cetera. However, when you go out into the community, nobody can say anything distinctive about our school. It is truly the generic business school is how we're perceived. So what we decided to do was to try to develop some specific strategic areas of focus. And the 2 areas that we chose were business analytics and creative solutions and innovation. Now, the thing about the reason those particular areas were chosen is because they span across every discipline. There is no discipline that can lay claim to business analytics because it's used in marketing, finance, information systems, management, all the different business disciplines. And creativity and innovation, once again, is another theme. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to encourage research that brings faculty together as opposed to getting isolated pockets of research. Now, there are a number of challenges to this. One is it's hard to get the functions to play together because most of us get uncomfortable about the unfamiliarity of walking down the corridor to speak to other colleagues, much less wandering into another department. It's very hard to involve every function, and different functions have different research paradigms. When I talk to folks in finance, they have a totally different idea of what research is than what I do. Faculty don't like to be told what to research and teach. Faculty, especially tenured faculty, are incredibly stubborn, and their strongest conviction is that they're right. So what we're doing now is we're starting with multifunctional programs, such as our MBA, where you have to have classes from a lot of different disciplines. And we're introducing these multidisciplinary courses and requiring faculty to work together. We're also trying to bring in faculty who have multiple perspectives. I was asked to chair a meeting for analytics, which is normally not my area, but the idea was that if I were chairing it, nobody would be jealous. But at any rate, we're actually working in that way. We're trying to resist any ownership and we're building in initiatives, moving in measured steps. Practice centers. Now this one is much more developed than our new, the first initiative I talked about. And I'm proud to say this one came out of my department, Information Systems. I just copied this from our website. What we do is we have organizations come into USF, and for $15,000, they get a collection of 2 or 3 undergraduates or MBA students who will work with them for a semester on a specific project under the supervision of a faculty member. And the businesses pay $15,000 for the privilege of doing this. The students get paid for their participation, and the faculty member gets a very small stipend for supervising the process. Now, when I was first told about this program, I was thinking, boy, we're going to have a real tough time finding companies. But it turns out we have had companies lining up for these practice centers. I'm supervising a practice center right now where a company is basically looking to see how to change its strategic direction. And they're looking into business analytics. And they have been incredibly impressed by what the students have been doing. And we've been having presentations every couple of weeks as we refine the problem. So the first presentation dealt with a survey of analytics overall. Now they're moving into a specific industry area. Next they're going to move into specific tools area. And the students are basically educating them. By the way, they're also educating me, which is a nice side effect of these things. But you can see some of the companies that we've had, 3M, Citigroup. I did one of the first practice centers with Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase, FinTech, a lot of very big firms. And right now, this semester, I think we have 6 or 7 of them running just in my department. And we're expanding these things out to the whole College of Business because it has been such a successful activity. I was going to run a video here, but I don't have the time to do that, so we'll move on. Now, some of the challenges are, for example, when we first started, it turns out there's a big problem with paying our international students. Getting faculty involved was initially a big problem because a lot of faculty members actually get uncomfortable when you put them out in a practice situation. And the issue of intellectual property turned out to be the biggest issue that we ran into. I had a practice center with a major company that was derailed because our sponsored research got a hold of the idea, and they said, this is a wonderful idea, but we have to make sure that USF gets all the intellectual property rights that are created through this practice center. Now, ironically, the purpose of this practice center was to work on the company's internal website. So our university wanted to lay claim to this company's internal website. And the company was understandably a little concerned about this peculiarity. So over the years, what happened is we devised ways to get around this stuff. USF becomes the employer. This allows us to employ the international students because we can do that while they are students as a form of aid. We treat the practice centers as external grants. At our university, external grants is a very, very big deal, and the College of Business virtually never gets them. But by defining practice centers as external grants, it makes it much, much more palatable to faculty. In fact, they cut our pay for doing these things as soon as we declared them external grants because we had to pull out overhead and all that stuff. But we didn't care because we had something we could put on our resume. What we also did is we developed a special fast-track contract for practice centers that basically relinquishes intellectual property rights to the companies that are hiring us and does a bunch of sensible things. And as a consequence of that, now when we start these things up, they go very smoothly. We can usually get the whole thing approved in a day or two. So this has been a very successful program. Oops, now the next one I want to talk about, oops, I went back one too many, is our cybersecurity center and programs. Cybersecurity has become a big area, and we were instrumental in launching a cybersecurity initiative within our university. The interesting thing about this particular initiative is that we have basically designed the program with 4 colleges: the College of Business, Engineering, Arts and Sciences, and Behavioral and Community Sciences. So from the College of Business, my department, Information Systems, is most heavily involved. In the College of Engineering, we have Computer Science. Arts and Sciences has the Information Science Department. And Behavioral and Community Sciences, we have the Criminology Department, all involved and working collectively to build this program. For those of you at large universities or even small universities, you have no idea of how challenging it is to get different colleges to work collaboratively in a project. You know, if you want to build firewalls between them and there's money involved, sometimes you can get them to do stuff. But to actually work collaboratively is something. And in fact, I recently put together an NSF proposal that involved these different colleges to create a capstone course for the program. And this is the first time that colleges have ever collaborated on a single course. But there is big money involved from the state of Florida, potentially. So, you know, one of the things is if you're going to get something like this to succeed, you need some sort of pot of money. Otherwise, everyone's going to view it as a zero-sum game. And departments are very, very protective of their resources. The perspectives on research and teaching are wildly different, and this is a challenge that we have. Trying to get different areas to define what they mean by rigor turns out to be almost impossible. So, you know, the solutions that we found to making this work, and we're pretty far along on this now, we'll be launching our first master's in cybersecurity in the fall, is we need to find ways of getting a payback so that nobody feels it's a zero-sum game, such as the proposal we put together. And then we've been brought together multiple times for meetings where we're encouraged to come up with sort of out-of-the-box ideas to make this a really unique program. Okay, now the next one is the case study initiative. And on this particular initiative, I have been very involved in one part of it, but it actually has 2 prongs. One of the first prongs is that our college has become incredibly involved in various case study competitions, even hosting these. A case study competition typically involves students being given a case study in something like 24 or 48 hours to get an analysis. They present the analysis to the companies about whom the case is written, and then there are judges and prizes and so forth. And in the past, we had limited participation in these, but it's something that has been growing over the past decade, and now we have typically 4 or 5 different competitions that we participate in every year. And that has really created visibility for the analysis of case studies. Now, the other thing that we've done is we've had a writing and teaching initiative. That little thing on the side is basically a poster I had from an NSF presentation I did for a grant we got to develop case studies for our capstone course. And we actually created the entire undergraduate course in our MIS program now consists of case discussions. And all the case discussions are case discussions that we wrote as faculty. And I'll tell you, when I talk about some of the outcomes of this a little bit later on, there have been some very, very positive aspects of this, because I'll tell you, there is nothing more exciting than having your students discussing a case about a decision that a company needs to make and having the CEO of that company sitting there listening to the discussion at the point where he hasn't even made the decision yet. And in a lot of the cases that we've done, we get them out so fast that the key decision maker, the protagonist, hasn't even made the decision the first time we do the case. Very exciting for students, very exciting for the faculty. We're also developing a lot of live cases for our executive MBA capstone. Apparently, I had a little trouble there with the fat fingers, but at any rate, I'm going to be doing a couple of those this year. where we actually have decisions to be made by the College of Business, and we write them up as a case study, and then have the executive MBAs discuss them. We did this with our executive doctoral program, which I think is the next one that I'll be talking about, and it actually played a major role in helping sell the faculty on the idea of this program. We've got this proposal I talked about that involves 3 different colleges to develop this case study capstone course for the cybersecurity. I won't know about that one until May, but just getting everybody together for a proposal was a very positive exercise. One of the things that I have been doing is going out and doing workshops on the case method, because for this to be really successful, I need faculty from other institutions to start thinking about incorporating this in their own activities. And I did one here the day before yesterday. Over the past year, I've done them at the UN Staff College in Turin, in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, in South Africa, at the National Science Foundation, and here in Orlando, as well as in USF. And you know, people wonder why I keep giving the book that I wrote away. And the answer is that I really, for this thing to be really successful, we need to get other universities involved. And I'll talk a little bit about what Harvard did towards the end when I do my analysis. Okay, so what are some of the challenges? Well, most researchers don't understand the nature of a discussion case, and frankly, they don't consider it research. Even when you go out, interview people, try to do a very rigorous write-up, they say, well, wait a second, that doesn't constitute research, which is one of the problems that you have. In anthropology, it'd be considered research, but God help us in business. So the only time that's proved to be an advantage to me is when I went to our institutional review board about writing a case, and I was really nervous about that because they want a list of all the questions you're going to ask, and I have no idea what questions I'm going to ask when I go into a case situation. But they decided that because I wasn't doing an experimental manipulation, it wasn't research. So now I have an official letter telling me what I'm doing is not research from the university. Imagine my enthusiasm. Also, it's a totally different skill set. And what I found in our department, for example, is some of our top researchers have not been able to complete a case, which they were supposed to do as part of the grant, because they try to write the case the way they do research. And one of the things that means is they take 6 months or a year to do it. Well, if you take 6 months or a year to write a decision case, that decision has already been made and the people involved are not interested and they don't understand why you're taking a year to do this. Whereas if you're writing a paper for a top journal, oh, you know, you wouldn't want to rush it before it's time. So, whereas some of the people who were not considered, research focused, were more teaching focused, some of these folks have written 3-4 cases already, and they're doing it without my help, which probably makes for a better case. So, how do we deal with this? Well, we have to educate faculty, we have to do the workshops. We have to find ways of making them inseparable from research, because no matter what our IRB says about it not being research, if we get an NSF grant or another federal grant of that type, then the College of Business will consider it research because it's rare, and because it's rare, it's valuable. And it requires a certain amount of mentoring. You don't just go out and do this without someone to help you along the first time. Okay, the last new program I want to talk about is our executive doctorate program. And this particular program is designed for senior executives. They will be getting a Doctor of Business Administration degree, maybe, or an executive doctorate in business. That's still, we'll be voting on that tomorrow. And the idea is that we're going to take in executives and we're going to train them in research techniques. We're not going to try to teach them how to do business, but we're going to train them in research techniques that they can apply in their businesses. But it will also make them qualified to teach at the graduate level. For those of you who are in the southern area, you cannot teach a graduate course if you don't have a terminal degree. And we would love to have some of these people come in and teach us, teach our students with their real-world experience, not as full-time, perhaps, but adjuncts. But, and they would like to do it. So as a consequence, We've developed a 3-year program. It will meet on weekends. It has 72 credits. I did a lot of research in this area, published some papers several years ago on the nature of these programs, and we've really created, I think, a very interesting design where what happens is these courses sort of in off-white are research methods. The green courses are ones that deal with our areas of specialization, so they're basically multidisciplinary courses across the college. I put in some courses without titles because in these programs, if you have courses that have titles, faculty members establish ownership of them and they never change. So we're trying to build a program that will change dynamically over time. And then we have a whole series of courses here that are specifically designed to be chosen by the students. So as they go through the program, we reach a point where they collaboratively decide on topics for courses in their last year based upon their interests and what faculty members propose, and in some cases what they propose. So, challenges, will executives buy into this? Well, we're not going to give them much time this year because there's been a lot of delays in getting this thing out, but so far other programs like this in the country have done very well. Faculties are always concerned about program rigor, more concerned about the rigor than actually defining what they mean by rigor. The biggest problem we've had so far is naming the degree, and the one thing we know is we can't call it a PhD, but we want something that's attractive to the students as well as to ourselves. The real question is, can the faculty reorient themselves to the different objectives of the program? Because we're not interested in this program so much in finding holes in the literature the way you would in a typical PhD. We're interested in applying research methods to practical problems, often the ones the executives bring in themselves. So in terms of other programs, we found that they have had no trouble getting recruiting. We're trying to be meticulous and inclusive in our program design, and we'll get back to you as to whether the faculty will be able to adjust to this, because our first class is scheduled to begin in August. So, quick segue into informing. It's really hard to convey information in a complex world. And I make fun of the lack of overlap between what business does and what our researchers do. But the fact is, this is a hard problem. And one of the things that makes it really hard is that in a complex environment, there are a huge number of interactions between attributes. So whereas if we were to do something in terms of a multiple regression, for example, we would have a dependent variable that we're trying to predict or understand, and we'd take 6 attributes, and what we'd try to do is find out how each attribute contributes, and we test for statistical significance and that sort of thing. That's a standard business research approach to the problem, basically separate things out. In a complex world, you can't do that because every time one attribute changes, the interactions change, and it's completely unpredictable what it will do to your final outcome. The analogy that I use for this is in a test, every question has a right answer, and to get the total score on the test, your fitness, you just add the answers together. And if you get question 13 wrong, that does not change the effect of your score on question 26. Each question has an independent effect. Whereas in a rugged landscape, it's like a recipe. And so asking a question like, is user involvement in creating a system a good thing, which is a question we ask a lot in my literature, is like asking, is garlic a good ingredient? Well, garlic's a good ingredient if you're making lamb. Probably not so good an ingredient if you're trying to make a dessert souffle. So the point is, the answer is always, it depends, and that's what complexity does. And the consequence of these interactions is that you get what we call a rugged landscape, where if you look at fitness as a function of some variables, there are lots of peaks and sharp drop-offs. And the peaks represent really good combinations. The drop-offs represent what happens if you get even one of the elements of that combination wrong. And that creates a very different type of situation, because if business is a rugged landscape, what that means is that every time we make a simple recommendation, most of the people who have followed the recommendation don't learn anything, and those who have chosen a different path would probably find that recommendation would hurt them rather than help them. So it makes it very, very hard to get out to that market. So theory also tends to be very ugly in that world, because you basically need a different set of relationships for every peak. So if you want a comprehensive theory, it's going to be pages and pages and pages long, because you have to deal with every special case. So another interesting characteristic of this environment is that if you take an expert, as complexity grows, expertise tends to be much less effective than just imitating other people. So what you really want to do in an environment like this is you want to cluster with similar people and see what they're doing, and then follow them if it looks like it's benefiting them, and don't do it if it looks like it's not benefiting them. And that's a very, very efficient solution. This is actually a simulation I wrote on a paper about homophily. And homophily is basically the tendency of things to cluster together. When you get an environment like this, you'll always get something like a diffusion curve, where you have innovators and mavens who are willing to look at innovations because they're unusual. They don't imitate everything. Early on, once they have started to adopt things, then other people, and this diffusion curve was originally developed in the context of farming, other people will see what they're doing, and then there's a point at which everybody sees people doing this experiment, and you get this rapid increase, and then you essentially tail off, as there are some people who won't change no matter what you tell them to do, even outside of academia, though in academia, they're a particularly large number of them. So the practical reality is that if you actually want ideas to diffuse, you can't just do it by tossing papers into the hopper. What you need to do is you need to find these people from the small world of practice, introduce them to applied researchers from the small world of academia, and if you can get them to have a dialogue, then they will go back and actually influence the rest of the community. But we can't just say, oh, well, we found a better way, so we'll do it. So the other characteristic of complex environments is punctuated equilibrium. And what that basically means is that you have periods of order interspersed by periods of rapid change. And change is not continuous. It tends to be very rapid. You tend to have discontinuities. And, in an environment like this, the average is not nearly as important as addressing these periods of order and dealing with adaptation when the order changes. And what this requires is a very adaptable strategy, because during the periods of order you can achieve efficiency, but if you achieve efficiency and lose adaptability, then the next time the environment changes, you will find yourself in a very, very big problem. What that does, it creates a premium on agility versus efficiency as complexity grows. I just flipped the hourglass over for this. Apparently, I've defied the law of gravity here. But the idea is that when you are looking for agility, your time horizon tends to be relatively short. In other words, you need to be able to react quickly, whereas in periods of efficiency, you can take a very long time horizon, build the giant factory, because you can count on being able to produce stuff for 30, 40, 50 years. Okay, so now let's just quickly take a look at the initiatives in terms of informing cycles. When we talk about the practice centers, it's very clear we're developing informing between practice, research, and students. As a faculty member participating in a research center, in a practice center, I am learning a tremendous amount. not only about the needs of the business, but also about my discipline, because my students have been doing a great job. And this seems to be true in every practice center I do. I'm getting exposure to the needs of the real world. The students are getting exposure to practice. The practice is getting exposure to the students and to me. It's an incredible, it's very, very effective. The analytics, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to take a world where everybody basically carves up research and each person does their own area and force them to collaborate together towards a common goal. And this is the idea of transdisciplinary research, where you take a particular problem and then you unite to try to solve it using a whole series of different perspectives. The cybersecurity initiative, we're trying to change the normal roles that we have, which is sitting in our silos and firing missiles at other silos, which is a pretty good description of a typical university. And we're trying to create an orchestra where, you know, the cellist is not trying to fight with the trombonist. You know, whether that will happen, you know, or we're working. But the point is, having this conversation and creating interdependencies is good. It's the same theory that you have in global trade. If you create enough interdependencies, then folks won't go to war. Whether or not that will work, we'll see. But the case initiative, typical lecture course, what happens is when I, you know, basically the main information flow is from instructor to students. You know, the traditional lecture course, large lecture. There's some information flow. You know, the textbook writer might be influenced by practice. There may be stuff in the textbook the instructor learns, but this is the big flow. Now, when you use a case study that someone else has written, what happens is there's obviously a clear flow between the case writer and practice, but there is a barrier here. The case writer's knowledge does not necessarily all get over to the facilitator. There's a big flow between the facilitator and the students when you have a discussion, and there's a tremendous flow between the students. So you got a lot more information flows there. Now, when you do a case study where you have written the case, or one of your colleagues has written the case, and you have the practitioner sitting in the classroom, you literally have all of these flows very, very rich. And when we start using cases with practitioners to try to help us make decisions, then we even get the practitioner discussions, as we've done with the executive MBA program. That is a very, very rich information flow, which is well suited to complex situations. HBS formula, they write cases. The cases turn into consulting assignments and board assignments. That provides them access to research sites, and it creates a very virtuous circle. That's why, even though cases aren't considered research by many, HBS prizes the development of cases because what it does is it supports this virtuous circle. Our executive doctorate. We are very specifically trying to train individuals who can sit here in between practice and research and act as communicators. And an executive doctoral program is something that Gladwell refers to as a maven trap, because the people who are most likely to want to serve in that role are exactly the type of people who are going to be attracted to a program like that. So, conclusions. In a complex world, you never solve a problem. Success is achieved if the solution introduces a new set of problems less severe than the original. I truly believe that. That is a fundamental characteristic of complexity. But there is some good news, because that same Wall Street Journal I quoted, where 96% of administrators were satisfied with what we're doing, reported that 88% of business leaders would like to have more collaboration with business schools. And what that means is that if we are willing to reach out, we will find executives who are willing to join up with us. And that was what we found in the practice centers in a big way, and what we think we're going to find with the executive doctorate. So business is ready to help us if we are ready to reach out. So thank you very much, and I'll be happy to answer questions at the end of the session.